Boys, another podcast. How are we all doing? How you going, Scotty?
Boys, going good, man. How you guys going?
Yeah, good.
Fantastic.
TMG,
Right. Awesome, man. Very, very good.
how's your mornings been? Good?
Yeah, mine was a bit messed up, man. I had when you just got a plan set for the day, and then one thing changed the whole thing. I went to visit my nephew in hospital because he gets really bad asthma. They admitted him yesterday because his oxygen levels were just really, really terrible.
Oh, poor
Oh,
thing.
man.
And I wasn't going to visit him because he was supposed to get out today, but I rang my sister and he was still in there, and I was right near the exit to the freeway where the hospital was. So I'm like, I'll sneak in. I'll go visit him. I was going to get an X-ray on my back, but I'll go visit him, surprise him. It'll make his day. Got there, couldn't find a parking. Finally got a parking. Then they wouldn't let me in because I'm not the mother or the father. So I
Oh,
did this
what?
whole loop around, and because of that, I was going to train this morning. I missed my training session. Just made it to the X-ray, but anyway. See, sometimes you try and do
Something good.
something good, and it bites you. But main thing, he's all right, which is the main thing. But yes, bit of a run around for nothing this morning.
Crazy. How about you, Scotty?
Yeah, good, man. I had a busy morning. Just finished up my last face-to-face session, so potty and then chunk of check-ins to get through, and then train myself. So it's good. It's actually really warm. It was quite cool earlier this morning, and I feel like the last couple of hours started to get a little bit balmy.
Yeah, it's been
It's
good.
going to be 30 today, I think.
Yeah,
This whole week's awesome, man.
I
Yeah, yeah.
I had a chat this morning with someone who was a consult, and she also watches the potty, and she's like, "Where's the podcast? It's not on this week." I was like, "No, we're recording it today." She's like, "Oh, the last 2 weeks it's been earlier, right?" I was like, "Yeah, it's been
Yeah,
Tuesdays because
Yeah,
Scotty's been away, but we're back on the Wednesday cycle, so we're good to go."
that's it.
we
Um,
are good to go.
yeah,
It's fun. I
the
actually had one of my clients who I met for the first time. She's coming in now once a week to do a one-on-one. Now she started her prep, and she said to me, her name's Aman. She said to me that the podcast has just been like a lifesaver for her in the sense that she had previous preps that didn't really come to fruition with some past coaches, and it just allowed her to be able to get an insight of what is perhaps normal, what's not, what is okay and what isn't, and it's just made such an enormous difference. And to hear, well, firstly, to meet her in person, then to hear firsthand her speak in terms of having such a positive experience with it, it was just such a rewarding feeling because essentially that was the whole reason we started this, was to try and give back to the industry and just trying to perhaps convey a positive message in terms of how we perhaps should be doing things versus some of the things that perhaps we should be looking to steer clear from. So yeah, that was really good. It's always good to get positive feedback from people knowing that we're offering some value, which is good.
Yeah, definitely, man.
Yeah, well, we do get a lot of great feedback, and I always screenshot it and send it to you boys and just show you all the messages that we do get. And it is overwhelming sometimes, and we appreciate it so much. So thank
Mhm.
you for everyone that's supported us. I've always had kind words to say about how this has made a positive impact on them. So we really, really appreciate it. We really got some good feedback from the last podcast. We did the analysis of the rookie show. And it's always tough when you are giving people critiques and feedback, but we had only positive responses. Like even for people that we gave feedback to, they were they were really happy with what we had to say, and even had some of their coaches reach out to us too. So thank you for allowing us to give you feedback and criticism, and it's something that we definitely want to do for the other shows that are coming up. So any show that we do physically attend, we're really going to make sure that we can watch all the lineups, and then we can do a podcast post that point and go through the lineups, give people feedback, areas for improvement, and maybe explain some judging decisions about why some things went the way they went. So I know you boys have had some positive feedback about the last potty too, right?
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Tons of messages, and as you said, I've even bumped into a couple of people at the gym who we mentioned on the podcast as well, who were super proud. And actually, just still people saying, "I can't believe that you guys were talking about me on the podcast." But man, it just shows anyone, if you're in this sport, if you're at a show, if you're competing, or there's something that you want to discuss, like we will cover it. We talk about anything and everyone related to the sport. We love it so much. We're happy to give feedback about any person or any topic. So reach out, and if you need any assistance, we're always here.
Yeah, definitely. Actually, on that point, let's get started. So we actually had two questions. We had a couple of questions, but two of them were from coaches, and they were very similar topic and theme. So I want to start with those two. Um, I'll just read them out. One says, "Hey legends, I just wanted to say I've thoroughly enjoyed your podcast and learned so much along the way. Would like to pick your brains about peak week and the different approaches you guys use leading up to the day. I feel confident in getting someone stage lean, but just want to fine tune the peaking process for clients. And then we had another one similar, so I think we can cover this one too, is absolutely love the podcast and just wanted to reach out and give you a suggested topic. First-time athlete for season A. So she's a first-time athlete for season A, and she's a first-time coach for season B, right? Was hoping you guys could go over what to expect as a first-time coach, any tips and tricks that you'd recommend both on show day and prepping an athlete. So maybe we should start with that. We'll cover first-time coach, what to expect with coaching someone. Then we can cover maybe some things that you should do in trying to learn how to peak someone for a show, and also the show day itself. Okay, so we probably all remember the first time we ever coached someone, and we've probably learnt a hell of a lot along the way. Whenever you're coaching someone for the first time, it's difficult, right? Like obviously your first time doing it, they're putting their trust in you to give them a certain result. So you do feel the pressure, of course you do. And obviously you can't really dictate what the result and placing is going to be. So you absolutely have no control. So one piece of advice I would give is don't ever promise anything to your client that you can't deliver. So you can never deliver a placing. You never say they're going to win or anything like that. So be really, really careful with maybe what expectations you set with your client. And you should really be setting the expectation on how they're going to look and that you're going to try to bring the best out of them. Whether that translates to them being the best in the day is totally out of both of your control.
Yeah.
The next thing is too is you've got to be really careful. It's an emotional process, and clients can be very concerned. They can be comparing themselves to other people. Sometimes they need a lot of reassurance. So if you are repeating yourself constantly and you're constantly reassuring someone, it's quite normal, right? So just know that you have to be their support person and their person that reassures them along the way, that trust the process, this is working, it's all gonna make sense, it's all gonna be worth it in the end, for them to continue pushing through. So that's the two things I just want to say. There's probably a lot of other things I could say, but MG, do you have any advice for a coach that's coaching someone for the first time and what to expect?
Yeah, so in terms of like the process of the prep, I think the best piece of advice that I would give to myself if I went back to my first few clients was give yourself more time than you think you need. Mm-hmm. So potentially, if you feel like you're going to get someone lean in a certain amount of time, let's say it's 22 or 24 weeks, allow 28. And one of the things that obviously, I do a lot better now than back then, and you're always going to get better as time goes on, is really spend time mapping out what the whole thing's going to look like from week 1 to week end, and have your client on the same page, understanding what that's going to look like as well. But I think in terms of close to the show advice, my best piece of advice would be make sure that you give the client as much information as you can in the weeks leading up to the show. So things like peak week plans, which we're going to get into in a minute anyway, and show day plans, so that, they can pretty much wake up the morning of the show and have something in front of them that goes, okay, this is the time I get out of bed. This is the time I eat. Because as you know, as a first-time competitor, and I think the person that asked this is probably that first-time competitor this season, mm-hmm. The show morning is it can go so fast. You're not sure, am I supposed to drink? Am I supposed to eat? Am I supposed to? And MT spoke about a story last week about, a client asking another coach these type of questions on show day and getting, not great responses. So don't be that coach. Give them the information before the day so that, most of the questions you're going to answer, they won't even have to ask. And if they do ask, be understanding. People it's a stressful day. It's high stress when it's your first show. I remember my first show many, many, many moons ago. And even my most recent show, I couldn't sit still backstage, and I've done this many times. So just remember, it is a high stress environment. So just be there for your client and make sure they've got as much information up front as possible. It's definitely going to help you be a better coach too. And I think MT hit the best piece of advice on the head. You're never going to control what happens. So just reassuring them that they look absolutely incredible, and that regardless, this is their best physique they've ever presented ever, and they should be proud of themselves for that.
Yeah.
And if you know what, and if you do well and you win it, and you get a coach's award or you win a division, congratulations. And if you don't, I'm sure you've still done an amazing job.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. What about you, Scotty? First time someone's coaching someone. What should they expect, and maybe some words of wisdom?
Scott was like 4 years old when he started coaching someone.
You know what I was just thinking? First show, and do you know who one of the guys that I prepped for the first time? His name was Yusuf, and do you know he did an A and B show?
Oh wow,
What that would have been like in the early teen thousands, like 2014 or something.
Yeah, it was 2013, and it was actually out at La Trobe University.
That's right. Yeah, Bundoora.
Yeah. So I remember that like it was yesterday. It's hard to believe that's been over 10 years now. It's crazy. Yeah. A and B. Do you know what? I've actually still got the T-shirt from that show.
Wow.
Yeah. Do you know what I'm going to do now when I get tonight? I'm going to take it. It's very, very faded because it's seen some better days. I think Jenny's sleeping it now, but old school.
Wear it on a nip.
Yeah. I think both of you guys made really, really good points. I think the biggest thing, as you mentioned, MT, is just controlling expectations and managing those expectations, both for the athlete and also for yourself. I think there's a lot of, for some, I think some coaches can perhaps feel that there's almost an element of pressure that you've got to make sure you get a coach's award the first time you put an athlete on stage, but also bearing in mind that that isn't what the day is about. It's about the athlete. So I think as long as you're doing all those things that we've spoken about, there's an open dialogue of communication. I think the biggest thing is just being organized and prepared. You know, knowing in advance, okay, so they're on stage at 11:05, at 1:05. If you've got more than one athlete, you should have a running list, for not just for the day, but for when your athletes are on, what they need to be doing and where you need to be. Because sometimes, I know for us, that's the biggest battle. If you've got a large team competing on the day, it's not just auto-regulating, I'm going to go see you, then go see you. I literally have a by the minute sheet. Okay, I need to be over here with this person. They're going to be over there. I need so-and-so to pump him up. I remember MT, when we were at the NBA show, you were actually helping with some of my guys because the times were clashing. And I was like, hey, man, can you give him this? He's got his running sheet. And it made it so much easier. And the guys even said to me afterwards, it was so much more enjoyable. And they were relaxed because they had a plan. And even just to have someone that was able to, like MT, who's very calm and collected, to just be with them. Okay, Scotty wants you to have this. Yep, it's on your sheet. We've ticked that off. Just relax, or now we're going to pump up. So I think as long as you're organized and if you have those running sheets and you're just that supportive person, and never ever, even if you feel like it's a silly question, never ever make them feel like it's a silly question.
Yeah.
You know, when you said the other week that it was perhaps people not getting the best responses from their coach, you're probably never going to be more vulnerable than when you're on that show day, especially if it's your first time. You don't know what to expect. You don't know what to do. So having someone that's very calm and confident, it will definitely let your athlete be calm and confident, and it will display in their physique.
Yeah. It's actually a positive effect on their physique if they're calm. So use it
versus if you're stressing and you're like, come on, you know, and you're trying to be very erratic and I guess high pressure, then they will feed off that and it will show in them. Versus if you're just very calm and collected, then that will carry over to them.
Yeah. So the person that asked this question, she's competing for the first time in season A. So I'd recommend for her is just think about all the steps you take on show day, right? Take note of them. And that's pretty much how you should be coaching your client, right? They've got to get there. They've got to do their hair, tan, makeup, whatever that is. And after that process, they've probably got to get their bikini on. And after that, maybe you've got to see if they've got to eat anything or do anything. Is there any last minute things they need to do? Then X amount of time out from when they jump on stage, they've got to pump up. So whatever process you go through, make sure you note that down and you know what that is. And so then for when you have your client in season B jumping on stage, you know exactly what you need to do for them. It should be a very similar process. But also educate them up front, just like what MG said, but educating them up front to let them know exactly what the plan is for the day. Everyone knows what they're doing. Everyone's on the same page. There's no stress. There's no anxiety. Any dumb questions come up, just answer them professionally, because I'm sure there will be. So, yeah, if anything that's come from what we just said is manage expectations and make sure they know exactly what they're doing and what the plan is, and just make sure they have an enjoyable day. Make sure they really, really enjoy it. It's all about the experience, right? So
Yeah, and make sure you enjoy it as the coach as well.
yeah, yeah, definitely. So then let's move on to the next part of the question, which was to do with show day. Actually, no, let's talk about peaking, because that's the next thing in line. And then let's talk about show day. So the first person that asked the very first question was about they can get their client stage lean, but they need help with the peaking process. So is there like and that one there was asked by a male, that component. So I'm assuming he's also prepping other males, let's just say that. So let's maybe go through a peaking of someone that's shredded, right? So like, men's physique or something like that. And maybe a peaking of someone that's just a bikini athlete. So let's go to the more extreme and let's go to what's the least extreme from a peaking perspective. So maybe, Scotty, you might want to start this off is what's a dummy's guide to peaking someone? Now, not saying peaking like how we peak someone, where we've learned so much along the way and we know like the intricate things and we're getting them within that 1%. Like if you just want to peak someone and make sure it's the first time you're ever doing it, you don't want to do anything extreme, you don't want to stuff anything up, you want to be super safe. Like what's the best way of peaking someone nice and safe to give them a great result, and over time you can refine your craft?
Firstly, I think if time affords you the luxury, at least 2 weeks or 3 weeks out, if you can even try and structure it around your refeed days. If you can mimic a peak week, even if it's over a 3-5 day period, it's definitely going to be advantageous because you've got a trial run. And again, bearing in mind that maintenance calories is a moving target when we're very conditioned, and trying to find out where that ceiling is from a muscle glycogen saturation perspective. So how much carbohydrate do I need to push in to elicit the look or get the response that I want to get? And there's no set formula on that. Like there's recommendations. We know roughly 80 to 120 grams of liver glycogen. Some guys anywhere from 400 to 600 grams to attain complete saturation. But again, every single person is unique and is different. So there's no like one blanket size fits all approach. So it is very bespoke to the individual. And that's why we have certain do's and don'ts for peaking, but there's nothing that we can give you that 1.4 grams of this and 2 grams of that. It doesn't really work like that. So I guess some of the things that I would look at doing is potentially, if you have the luxury, just gradually, linearly load food throughout the week. And I tend to do that as of, if the show's on a Saturday, for example, I'll probably start bringing food up as of Wednesday. And again, gradually bringing it in, not just going if they're running low days, say on 1,600 calories, I'm not going to just take them to 3,200 or give them 1,000 grams of carbs, because firstly, they won't be able to partition it and they won't be able to digest it. Versus if you just gradually bring it up, and again, you should know roughly where their estimated maintenance is, because assuming if they're stage lean, you have been giving them refeed. So you've got an idea of where that is. So perhaps if their low days, let's say they were 1,600, you might add in an extra 100 gram of carbohydrate on day one. And again, elicit the response, get some biofeedback from the training session where they're able to get a good pump. Be mindful that if you're increasing carbohydrate, variables like sodium needs to increase and water intake needs to increase so that we can partition that carbohydrate. And then again, assess the photos the next morning, use the scale weight, and then on perhaps the next day on day 2, if there's more room, and that will typically be a day where you're going to probably have your highest intake, or it is for me, where that, let's say that I had 400 on the Wednesday, then we might push in, if we think that there's room for a lot more, 550, say the next day, which is a big increase, but if you think that's where they need to be, and then they train, yep, they look good, wake up, we've still got a little bit more room. So then bearing in mind that they're going to be doing a lot less on the Friday, and so into training we'll get to in a sec, I potentially pull back on the Friday, and then most of that carbohydrate would be consumed in the early part of the day, so that we can then keep food volume quite low in the PM area after or leading into the show, so that the morning of there's less food volume in their stomach, and it also gives us a window of time to hopefully have a good bowel movement and get some of that food out of the system. But the advantage of pushing food in gradually over a couple of days, if you haven't had a bowel movement for a few days, which a lot of athletes struggle with when they're on lower calories and they're very lean, the likelihood is that you'll probably be able to have one just by a bit more food, a bit more water. It does help to move things through the large intestine. And then keep food very, very minimal on the day of the show, pending that you've got the look that you like. Make sure that they're hydrated. Don't manipulate water, don't manipulate electrolytes, and don't start introducing foods that they haven't had before.
Yep.
So if you usually use rice and rice cakes or cream of rice, whatever it is for the carbohydrate sources, then I would use that moving forward. In terms of how you allocate your meals, I'm an advocate when we're pushing high carbohydrate days to be selective in the actual net amount per meal of carbohydrate you're consuming. I think knowing that, again, and if we use endurance athletes as an example, typically 80 to 100 grams of carbohydrate per hour is kind of going to be the maximal threshold that most people are going to be able to tolerate and partition without any gastrointestinal duress. So typically, if you can have 5 or 6 meals, if you're pushing in 80 to 100 grams per meal as your ceiling, that is going to be partitioned and digested a lot better than if you're going 4 meals at 150 grams of carbs. And also being mindful of the protein intake with that as well. I'll typically bring protein down a little bit in that it is a little bit slower to digest. And potentially even using fats as an example. If you have someone that is, say, a greyhound and they just burn through carbohydrate, adding in some more fat the day before can be a good way. We use the term to let them stick, the carbohydrate. So you might push in not as much as you did on day 2, but say an extra 30 grams of fat, and that will just slowly let that seep in. And then obviously everything's there when you need it on the day, and you just turn on the switch. And in terms of training, I would reduce as the week goes on. Again,
let's just stop there at the nutrition component for a second.
Yep.
So just a summary, right? So you're saying if the show was on Saturday, you'd probably load Wednesday, Thursday, come back down on Friday, so they don't have a lot of food in their system, and then not much food on the day of the show. If you've got the desired look, pretty much water stays consistent, sodium, electrolytes stay consistent, the food that you're using stays consistent. You shouldn't change anything, do anything differently. You shouldn't be having meals that have over 80 to 100 grams of carbs in each one, because that's normally how much we can normally digest and partition. Sounds pretty reasonable. And if it's someone that's chewing through a lot of carbs, then maybe the utilization of fats to slow that digestion down a little bit would help. Yep. I summarized it well?
Yes, and the last thing that I forgot to mention is the day before we would typically pull fiber in the PM as well. So we typically don't want to have anything that's going to slow the rate of digestion or delay gastric emptying. So we want to make sure that we're essentially pulling back on that. So if you would normally have salad and vegetables like most of us do when we're dieting in your evening meals, you wouldn't have that. You'd have, I'm a big fan of something like egg whites or some protein with some very, trace carbohydrates as your last meal, because it's super light. You go to bed almost borderline a little bit hungry, even though you know that everything is there, but you just don't want a lot in your stomach leading into it.
Yeah. So the next thing that people are probably thinking, sweet, great cheat sheet, guys, but how do I know if I am progressing in the right direction? So, after that Wednesday, Thursday, they weigh in, they send you some photos. How do you know if you've done well or not? Like, how do you know if you're pushed too hard, haven't pushed enough? What are you expecting to see in their look and on the scale?
So we should see a rise in scale weight, and people can sometimes panic, but again, you need to think about it logically. So let's say, for example, that we've increased carbohydrate by, say 150 grams. Straight away, firstly, food volume is going to be a little bit higher, so we need to assess that. We're going to get a response there. But also, we need water to partition that. So we're probably going to look at, anywhere from 3 to 4 meals, let's say 3 meals for easy math. So we're looking at 500 grams of additional water plus some food volume. So we would expect to see 800 grams minimum on the scale. If we're seeing a drop and then they still look flat the next day, and that's why we've got to really use our eyes and not just quantitative metrics, then that is something we would look at. And the other thing is as well, we need to gauge how was their workout. Did they struggle to get a pump? If they can't get a pump, then it's telling you that potentially there's not enough carbohydrate in there. They may be low on sodium, and they may be dehydrated as well. So they're things that we need to look at managing as well. And that's why it's important that you are tracking your fluid intake consistently and your electrolyte intakes consistently, because if you're not, then you don't really know where the ceiling is, and you're not sure how much you should be having or potentially more having, given that you're adding in extra of one of those substrates.
Perfect. So we're looking for scale weight to come up slightly, based on how much carbs you put in and how much water that's added in and stored into the muscle.
Yep.
We're looking at better pumps and better performance in the gym, and we're looking at them looking a little bit fuller, so not flat. So therefore, for me, when I think of fullness, I think of we actually look a little bit leaner. We actually have a little bit more separation between the muscle because now that every muscle is now popping
sitting up against the skin more.
The separation, the difference between the muscle groups should be greater.
Yeah.
Shouldn't be any more blurred lines anymore, if that kind of makes sense.
Yeah, and I think for us, all three of us as well, like let's say if we stick with the theme of the Saturday show, we're all pretty much Wednesday to Saturday photos every morning.
Mm-hmm.
And then sometimes if it's a nighttime training session, sometimes photos straight after that as well. So like Scotty mentioned, like using your eyes, like regularly looking at the physique. If you're just getting a plan at the start of the week and then not looking again until the show day, potentially you're missing the boat a little bit.
Yeah. So then that's the peaking. So you want to cover training for during that time. So we covered nutrition for dummies on peak week. What about training for dummies on peak week?
So training wise, again, we want to bear in mind that we don't want to grind all the way up until the end unless we're in a position where we're trying to get leaner. So basically, as you get closer, you want to have the mindset that you want to try and mitigate and wash off as much fatigue as you can, because obviously in a dieting condition, when we've been going, we're dug down quite deep. We're in a low energy availability state, and we're essentially asking our body to perform optimally in a suboptimal environment. There is going to be some recall that comes with that, typically in the form of edema, and you can just feel that you look fatigued, you are fatigued, you can't flex as hard. So trying to dissipate some of that. And the whole point is that while we're giving back to one system on the nutritional side, we also want to give back on the training side too. So basically the last hard session, again, if we're going to use the example as a Saturday, for me would probably be on the Tuesday. If you're training legs, that last leg session would probably, depending on the division, if it was a bodybuilder or someone that I wanted to be able to show off striated quads, or even the men's fitness guys, their last leg workout's probably going to be on the Monday. And even then, it's going to be at probably around about 80%. I'm telling them not to go anywhere near pushing anything to failure, not because they're necessarily going to do more. Well, in a lot of ways, we don't want to accumulate the fatigue, but also we don't want that muscular soreness, because with that soreness is going to come edema.
Yeah.
But we just want to keep them whole at that stage. The last thing we want to do is get anyone injured. But typically, as of Wednesday, we'll then start to revert over. Wednesday will typically be either an upper body session or a push or a pull. And then as of Thursday, 2 days out, we would start to perform our circuit-based or our glucose transport sessions that we refer to, where we're essentially trying to just help push that carbohydrate around. The first one on the Thursday will be, maybe 45 minutes to an hour, lots of squeezing, lots of posing in there. But again, we're not taking anything close to failure. We're just trying to get a really, really good pump and use that workout as a guide to be able to see, are we actually at the ceiling of where we need to be? In a lot of ways, spilling on the Friday, if we can, it's advantageous, because at least we know we've hit that ceiling and we've got plenty of time to tidy that up. You're not going to have gained 500 grams of fat mass overnight, but if you do spill, say on the Friday, you know that you can pull back and that the tanks are completely full. And provided you just pull food back a little bit on the Friday, they're relaxing, they're not doing anything. Come the Saturday, it's going to be lights out. You just don't need to feed them much.
So spilling is where you're getting all those positive effects, like good pump, good training session, weight's gone up a little bit, but we've actually lost a bit of blurry lines there. So
sometimes, typically because you've taken on maybe a little bit too much carbohydrate, and so as a result, you've spilled, you're holding a bit of water. Again, that water isn't going to be there forever, and you know that provided that you don't continue to feed at that rate, once you start to exercise and your body starts to use some of that glycogen and that glucose that's available, that is going to obviously start to make its way into the muscle to provide energy, and then that will start to clear out, and then again, everything will be there as you need it on the day. It's essentially, if that was the case, if I had spilled someone, woke up on the Friday and were a bit spilled, then I'm probably going to keep their carbs quite low. And it would just probably be fats and protein to try and just hold that look, because I know that once Saturday comes, having not fed them carbohydrate, they start pumping up, that water's going to clear out, and they're just going to get better and better and better. And obviously pushing in that sodium, that acute dose on the day as well. Obviously where sodium goes, water follows. So it will help to move some of that water out of the way as well.
Perfect. So basically, essentially a summary of training is, as the week progresses and as you get closer to the show, you should be training less intensely you should be getting some really, really good recovery. And really, it's towards the end, it's just about going through some kind of pump sessions to actually just shuttle the carbohydrate into the muscle, but do anything extreme from like trying to lift heavy, crack PBs, or trying to get super sore or anything like that, or train to failure.
Yeah.
And exactly right.
Even managing your overall expenditure as you get closer to show. So thinking about things like steps, you might have been doing 15, 16,000 steps leading up to comp. Same as peak week, right? We'll start to taper those steps back. So as you're bringing training back, you're also bringing steps down. So like an example might be Monday, you might still do your usual 15,000. Tuesday might be your last big day. You might do 13 or 14,000. Then you might start to bring them down 9, 7. And as you get closer to the show, pretty much not having them moving too much on the Friday, which is when they should be doing their last sort of glucose session and getting their tan. And I think one of the common mistakes you all see is like, we'll speak to people who's like, man, Saturday I came to the show. I was super, super flat. I couldn't get a pump. But if you had to see me Friday night, man, I was groused. We had a mad session. I felt like I could have lifted the whole gym. And they did lift the whole gym. And all that beautiful glucose that they had sitting there has now been burned through. And then they've woken up the Saturday and they just haven't got enough time to fill back up now. Yeah. So what Scott said about, it's probably the one session you want to go in there and freaking go to failure on everything. Because a lot of the time you're already tanned. You look amazing. You feel amazing. You've just had 3 days of carbs. And it's actually the session you've just got to just chase a little bit of a pump. So just be careful not to overexert leading up to the show. Less is more.
Okay. Peak week sounds pretty fun. So you get more food, less training, and less steps.
That's why I'm a big advocate of back-to-back peak weeks if you can do it. A lot of people fear it. As an athlete, it's amazing because this is awesome. I've got another peak week. I don't have any. The hardest session of the week is probably going to be show night when you finish comp and you've got to wash off all that carbohydrate.
But that's a fun one too. I remember when I was talking to Scott very, very years ago now, very early on, we're just talking about, managing my prep and stuff. And, the show was 26 weeks out or whatever. Scott's like, all right, so we've got 25 weeks. Yeah. So, no, we've got 26. It's like, no, we've got 25. So we don't have that week. That week, we're not making any progress in that week.
It's a write-off. That's right.
So it's a good attitude to have.
I was just going to say that for all those that think, I'm 5 weeks out, you're not. You're really 4 weeks of dieting left. Like that's the last week's pretty easy.
Yeah, and all that, everything in that conversation is premised on the fact that you are lean enough.
100%. Okay, so we've spoken about managing expectations with a new client and how to coach a new client through to the show. We've spoken about peak week. Let's speak about show day, right? So show day comes around. We kind of already spoke a little bit about how you want to manage your client on a show day. Stress low, make sure they know exactly what they need to do. Everything's planned out. They know where they're going to be at what time, any appointments they have, what time they're going to be on stage, all those kind of things. So all those things should be known up front. You should better plan for all those things. What do we do with, obviously we're not training on that day. We're not really doing any steps per se on that day. What are we doing with food on a day like that? Do you want to go through it, Scotty?
You want to boys have a crack? It's up to you. I don't mind.
Yeah. So in essence,
I'm the one always talking. Give more my voice. That's all.
Oh, we love your voice, Scotty.
We love your voice.
Yeah. So in essence, basically, what we do is, and if you're a coach, is basically try and get ahead of time for when you're athlete, or if you are the athlete, when you're on stage. I'm just going to talk from a coach's point of view, and basically just reverse engineer the day, right? So work out. All right, if I'm on at lunchtime. And I've got hair and makeup in there at some point, basically work out what time do I want to get out of bed, what time do I want to have my first meal. So basically what I'm pretty sure all three of us would do was work back from the division time, work out how far out from their first division would we like them to have their last meal. All right, so let's say we're going to work, and I'm talking about not like a pre-backstage top up or anything like that. I'm talking about last main meal.
Yeah.
We might say, all right, so let's say 2.5 hours out, we're going to have our last meal. To which after each meal of the day, we're going to do like a little pump up and again, just have a look at what that looking like. And then we'll back at 3 hours back from that, which will probably be meal one. So let's say that now we're at 7 a.m. And then from there, you're going to pick what time you're going to get up. So you're going to say, all right, we're going to get out of bed at 6:30. We're going to have meal number one at 6:45. And again, in that meal, exactly as Scotty said before, we're not trying to do anything super or fancy. We're trying to keep it exactly the same as what we've been doing. We're probably not going to eat as much protein. For me, that morning meal, I try and pull protein back just a little bit. And again, I'm not looking for a ton of fiber either. So I'll keep something pretty simple, like might be just a small amount of chicken, some rice and some peanut butter would be like a pretty staple meal for me. A little bit of salt. And then I'll also just give a little bit of detail around how much water to be having. So I don't say no water show days. I know some people do no water. I do small amounts of water, and then sips as required post that. So I'd say meal 1 around 7, do a little bit of a pump up, take some photos, have a look what you're looking like, send some photos to your coach, and then from there, just absolutely chill out. Try to do as little as possible. And again, I'm someone who struggles with that, but try and just put your feet up and relax. Maybe do a little bit of light posing, but nothing too strenuous. And then work out when your hair and makeup appointments are. If it's a female athlete, if it's a male, work out what time you need to be at the venue. Have all of your meals cooked and prepped. And then meal 2 would probably be somewhere between, say, 2.5 hours out. And then there'd probably be some carbohydrate intake, probably an hour to 30 minutes before going on, which would be some simple sugars, something like some jam, some rice cakes, potentially some lollies, some Gatorade. And then there'd also be some type of a pump formula, which is very similar to what most people would have in a pre-workout. Again, whether it was a caffeinated or non-caffeinated type of pre-pump would depend on the athlete. To give you an example, I'm pretty caffeine sensitive. So my pumps and all of my athlete pumps are pretty much just a pre-made formula of a reasonably higher dosage of citrulline malate, a little bit of beta-alanine, and again, an injected dose of sodium. It must be injected, not pushed in, must be injected to get the full benefit. And again, that'd be about 30 minutes out, which is when we'd start our massive pump up.
Yeah. And then after that point, you might have some more pump ups between divisions, or maybe some more sodium or some more, carbohydrate sources. And then post all your divisions, that's when we spoke about in other podcasts about getting some potassium to counteract all the sodium that you've had. So banana, coconut water, things like that.
Yeah. And then there might be some instances where, I think even last week or at the rookie show, I was coaching an athlete who we were sort of 2 divisions in. We had 1 to go. We'd been pumping up. One of the divisions was half an hour. And I think even MT came backstage and said, hey, man, why don't you go another pump up formula? Because, we'd been posing for so long that we'd kind of burnt through that one. So sometimes, we might even do a second pump up formula as well.
Yeah. Yeah. If it's been a bit of time between the 2 divisions and they've been waiting for a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anything else there, Scotty? What do you reckon? We've covered it?
I reckon you've covered it. I think the only thing that if you're in a position where they did wake up, say they woke up flat, because the physique can change overnight and you're like, what do I do? And that's another advantage as to why you want to wake them up reasonably early, just so that you can see where they're at. Because if they're on at 9 and you wake them up at 6:30, there's not really, and they don't look how you want them to look, you can't really do anything. So if they are on a bit later, I'll typically want to have at least a 5-hour window. So if they were on at 9:30, I'm probably going to have them up at 4, so I can see them. And as the coach, if you ask them to get up at that time, don't you then fucking sleep till 7 they take their photos. No, because I've heard stories of this before where whatever time they need to be up, and sometimes it isn't the best for you, but if you need them up at that time, you need to be up and on your phone ready. I've had times where I've had to ring athletes and be like, you haven't fucking sent them through to me, and they've slept in. And I'm like, quickly take your photos, send them through to me.
Get up.
You want to make sure that you have that feedback, because how they look and how their pump up goes when they first wake is going to give you some insight straight away. Yep, we're good, or maybe we're not. And sometimes they might wake up and be flat. They feel flat, but they start pumping up after having their 2 rice cakes with a little bit of honey, and it's like, whoa, now I'm good. So they're things that you need to look at. And another one is as well as keeping them nice and warm. So I'm a big advocate of keep your feet warm. So rock up in socks, sandals. Literally don't take your clothes off until the very last minute, because when you are in a lower body composition level, it's very easy to get cold. You're shivering and you're cold, you're going to burn through carbohydrate. But also, if your muscle belly is nice and warm, there's lots of blood flow to the area, you're going to be a lot more vascular. It's going to make getting a pump a lot easier. And if you do have to push in carbohydrate and you have a shorter window, supplementing with caffeine can also be advantageous in terms of helping partition it. So there's a lot of good literature to support, and we do it a lot with endurance athletes in terms of helping to load carbohydrate if you've got shorter windows or greater turnaround times. So adding in some caffeine with that meal. And if you have the luxury to push it in over smaller amounts over time, then do that. So don't try and give them 400 grams of carbohydrate in one feeding and be like, we were flat, now we're going to be full, because they'll just have a lot of stomach distension. So just gradually give it to them, and give it to them via a form of food that they know and that you know isn't going to leave them feeling full and heavy.
Yeah, totally.
There you go, the TMG peak week protocol.
Yeah, there you go. Another little thing that you nearly mentioned, and I just remembered, was stay off your feet too. If you're waiting around, sit down. Stay off your feet.
Keep them elevated.
Yeah. But there it is. There's a Dummies guide to peak week. So hopefully we were able to answer that question adequately for those two people.
It was reasonably in depth for a basic guide.
Yeah. For a basic, but that just goes to show, like, that's basic. It can get more complicated than that for sure. But we've covered majority of what needs to be done there for sure. Let's do some rapid fires and we'll just we'll continue on. So this is a good one actually. What would you suggest typically is more competitive, first timer or 30 plus? So I would say this. I know, especially in something like a fitness, where a 30 plus lineup is pretty competitive because you've got people that have been training for many, many, many years, and they might be a first timer, but in that 30 plus division, you're going to have people that have been training for a long time. And especially in a division where it requires a fair bit of muscle, it's going to be pretty competitive. I remember back in the day, 30 plus and the mum division for fitness was super competitive, really competitive. And that's where things like you see Bridget and Candice jumping into, right? Like, and they're two pros. So they're definitely two competitive division. Well, 30 plus I think would be a little bit more competitive than a first timer division for sure.
Yeah. Except at a rookie show.
Because they're all first timers.
Well, exactly right. You look at the men's physique, 16. You look at the 30 plus, 5 guys, right?
Yeah, sure.
So definitely the 30 plus in pretty much every other show in every other season, except for the rookie show.
Yeah, no, 100%. Lowest calories you've put someone on, and the highest calories you've put someone on in prep. The lowest I can remember that
I'm surprised this doesn't come up more often.
Yeah, no, actually.
I feel like it's something like, I reckon this is another coach, like this is a question coaches would be asking, like, what is other coaches putting people on?
Yeah, or even someone that's on low calories and want to know if their calories are the lowest compared to everyone else. I reckon the lowest I've got someone down to would be in the 900 range, so like just under 1,000, and that would only be for the last couple of weeks. The highest I had someone diet on, and these are two people that got absolutely shredded, was around like 2,300. And I'll say both of them were suffering the exact same amount. They're both suffering. Yeah. So it's all relative compared to what they were previously. But I even know someone like myself who had to diet down on pretty low calories to get super shreds. So my lowest I got to was 1,500, or it was in 15 and 16, and I was on 17,000 steps. So I'll just say whatever I put a client on, I've gone through myself because if you've got to think I'm on 1,500, but my protein is relatively high because my body weight is high.
Yeah.
Therefore, my fats and carbs were very low relative, right? So I've definitely been there when someone says, wow, mine's low. And I'm like, yep, I know the feeling. I definitely know the feeling.
For sure, man.
How about you guys? Lowest, highest?
I think the other thing with this, people get very caught up on, oh my God, she's on such low calories, or so is he. People forget that the whole point of a bodybuilding competition, if you're trying to get shredded, is at some point you're going to have to suffer and you're going to be in a state of low energy availability. It's not healthy. It's not healthy to be, I'm someone who's been able to diet and stay very, very lean on higher calories, but just because I'm eating more doesn't mean that what I'm doing is healthy. If I'm on low body composition, I feel like death all the time versus I'm on 500 calories or eating 2,600 calories. It makes no difference, whatever, because physiologically the suffer is exactly the same. Yeah. And it's all relative to fat-free mass as well. So I feel like there's a lot of, oh my God, that girl, she's only on 900 calories or 800 calories. Yeah, but if she's like 43 kilos on stage at 24% body fat or whatever, which a lot of girls might think, oh, I was 10, 12%. As a female, 10 to 12% is the essential levels of body fat. In terms of like, you're very, very, very lean at that point. So most girls aren't even close to that point. So if you're talking about someone who's got like barely 30 kilograms of fat-free mass, they're still consuming like 30 kcal per kilo of that. So which is like at the threshold, let alone we're in a bodybuilding competition. So we're sometimes going to have to exceed that. So I think people get very caught up on that. As long as you have a plan to reverse out / recover from that, which your coach should and would, then it's really irrelevant. And another really good example is if you, Matty won't mind sharing this. He, at the end of his prep, now he's an IFBB classic physique guy, and he's also enhanced, so he has pharmacal aid. He was doing, I think he said he was doing over 2 hours of cardio a day. 2 hours. He was dieting on less than 1,200 calories, and he was using anabolics. And you're talking about a guy that has more muscle than any of us three here as naturals, and he is dieting on that and using pharmacal aid and doing 2 hours of cardio a day. And he's a 95 kilo or whatever he's 90. I think he's 91 on stage, whatever he is. Like shredded to the bone. He's a beast.
Yeah.
And you even hear guys like Seabum when he won his classic year, they're taken to the extreme. There were some days he was dieting on 1,000 calories, 2 hours of cardio, blasting gear, and he's one of the largest, most aesthetic humans on the planet.
Yeah, and most of his prep was sub 1,500 calories. Most of it.
And if you've got a bikini girl who's dieting on 900 and she's doing half an hour or 45 minutes of cardio,
12,000 steps,
natural, and you're in a physique sport where you're trying to get leaner, you really don't I don't see the problem in it, in the sense that what we're doing, well, it's not healthy. As I mentioned last week, bodybuilding isn't inherently designed to be healthy. But what we're doing, it's not for a lengthy, well, in some cases it can be a long period of time, but we're not doing it to sustain it. We want to get in and then we're going to get out. And we have a plan to mitigate that. It comes with recoil. But we know that when we sign up for it. So similar to you, MG, I've had females that have had to diet on that. I've had some guys that I've had to dig on 1,300 at the very back end to really get them down to where we need to bring them back up. There's even another guy who a lot of the people that are in the exercise science world will know, Eric Helms. His last prep, he was prepped by Alberto, and he wanted to get a lot of the shit out of the way of his dieting. And I think he was dieting on around about 1,100 calories, 1,000, doing cardio every day. And he's one of the brightest minds in sports science and in sport and exercise nutrition science. And no one would ever question if he was doing that. He's doing that in himself. And again, 85 kilo bodybuilder. So I think context is very, very important. And so not that we're encouraging, at the end of the day, we want to be able to get an athlete as lean as we can whilst doing the very, very bare minimum and eating the most amount of food as possible. Now, that approach will be individualized to everyone. So, for example, what MT was able to diet on versus MG, what you dieted on versus what I dieted on, are all very, very different and are all bespoke to the individual.
Yeah.
But I think as well, setting yourself up metabolically well in the improvement season can definitely help with that. But there's also an element of genetics, which plays a big part. Some people have the luxury to be able to eat a lot of food and get lean relatively easy, and others have to dig a lot harder. But then there's those that are able to gain a lot of muscle a lot easier and find dieting harder, versus those that can get leaner, perhaps say greyhounds as I refer to them, and they have to really work a lot harder to gain muscle. So context is very important. And I think people need to let go of the whole 1,200. And when people have blanket statements, if they're eating 1,200 calories, their coach must be dog shit. I can't help but roll my eyes when I hear that. Because unless you understand the circumstances where they started from, how much they have to lose, there's all these other different elements that come into it.
Yeah. Plus, I think other coaches or other people will use it as a sales pitch and be like, oh, that coach is no good. That's too low. I could definitely diet you on higher calories than that. And if the coach that they're with now is actually pretty intelligent and pretty smart, they're probably doing everything they possibly can to do exactly what Scotty said, diet you on the highest amount of food possible to get the result. The next coach is not going to be able to do it any differently. Yeah.
And bear in mind that there's always going to be time in the prep where we refer to as a digging phase. There's time when you need to dig, and there's time where you need to give back to the system, but it's part of the process. And as long as your coach communicates with you, this is the reason why we're doing what we're doing. It's different if your coach is telling you to do an hour on the rower every day, just because they want you to do that at the start of prep 5 days a week, and there's no methodology behind why they're doing what they're doing. It's programming 101. There must always be a reason behind why we do what we do. But I think it's important to bear that in mind. And also for people that I don't know if you guys get this, that send DMs and ask, hey man, how much are you eating now and what are you dieting on? It makes no difference at all. So if MG's at the peak of his off season, and I mentioned the other day, you're looking a lot bigger through the chest there. Have people started to notice that? How much is he eating? What's your macro split? What he eats to get the results that he gets has no correlation to what you would need individually to elicit the same result. So even if and same for a girl, if you're like, oh, how much are you dieting and what are your macros? Those macros aren't magic, and if you follow them, you're going to get the same result.
Yeah.
It just doesn't work like that. So just to clear that out, because it tends to always happen. I know when I start prep, first thing, how much are you dieting and what are you eating? If someone else wants to do the same thing, or if you've got a girl, wow, she looks incredible, how much food are you eating? If I eat the same as that, will I get the same result? Unless you've got the same genetics as what she does, and you live the exact same lifestyle, then it just doesn't work like that.
Yeah. Anything to add, MG?
No, absolutely not. But smashed, greatest answer ever.
Yeah, it was awesome. Okay. How do you decide which division to go into when you're eligible for open, 30 plus, first timer, and mama? I only want to do 2. So
yeah, I would say this because I would say this. I mean, in a lot of feds, to win the overall, you got to win the open, right? So that's the first part that I would say is like, if you really want to be in it to win it and you're confident in your physique and you want to see how you stack up against the best of the best, do the open. And my next thing would be, if you're a mother and your kids are there, that potentially doing the mums would be the most rewarding and fulfilling division because, you know, in some instances you're allowed to bring your kids up on stage. So those 2 would be my pick of the 2. Just as a mum who competes, and all of us have multiple team members who are mums that compete. It's one of the best divisions. We love it. But if you're in that category, I would say open to put yourself in the conversation for potentially winning an overall, and mamas, so you can have your kids on stage and have a photographic memory of something that, you know, would be pretty damn special. Yeah.
And then if you don't want to do the open, my second choice would be going to first timer because it's going to be the first time and the only time you can ever be a first timer. So
correct.
You might as well get that done.
Yeah. Yeah. I suppose the other part to that, now that you've said that, is you're always going to be a mum. You're not always going to be a first timer. So maybe it's first timers and open, and then if you're going to compete again, do mamas the next time, or maybe do 3. Maybe do 3. But they would be like, there's an equal case for mamas and first timers. The 30 plus probably has, you know, out of those 4 is probably the least important.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
But maybe 3. Maybe stretch to 3.
Maybe stretch to 3.
Maybe stretch to 3, yeah.
Option for competitors sitting between fitness and bikini for season A, based on the ICN standards. Is it worth doing a show? So you're sitting between 2 divisions. I would say if it's an ICN show or an NBA show, you have sports that sit in the middle of those 2. And if you're saying you sit in the middle of those 2, then do sports. And then I'd probably get, as we've kind of said this multiple times, is send your photos to the promoter, to the judge, to the federation. Get their feedback. Ask them what they think. What do you think? Am I bikini or am I fitness?
Yeah.
And find out what they think and
I suppose the key thing is, like, I would be wanting to know, like, and I'll come from a promoter's point of view, is what makes you think you're in the middle? Is it muscularity? Is it condition? Is it something that can be worked on in the interim? And again, if it's just your opinion that you're in the middle, get the opinion of someone who's going to be at the show, judging the show, running the show. And if you know, your coach as well should be collaborating with you, of course. But yeah, the most important thing would be like the reasoning why you think you're in the middle. And is it something that can be overcome?
Yeah. Anything on that, Scotty?
No, I mean, I would have thought they're kind of worlds apart, aren't they? Bikini and fitness, in that you should be able to identify. For me, I'd be like, I don't think I'd ever have someone and be like, oh, I think you're in the middle between the both, unless, because when you pull and strip them down and you get them lean, you're going to know roughly how much tissue is there. I think for fitness, if you want to jump into fitness, you've got to have some size on your physique. Like, we're seeing that now. The girls that are winning overalls and winning pro cards, they're not small bikini girls. They've been training for a while. They've got some density in their tissue. You've got big shoulders. You've got big glutes. If you don't have those things, then you're not fitness.
Yeah. What do you think about athletes coaching themselves?
Good question.
Do you want to go?
Yeah, go, bro. You go.
Me? Yeah.
Yeah, go. Thank you.
If it's a cost thing, then that's perfectly understandable and fine. If you're coaching yourself and it's your first ever time doing a show, then I would definitely recommend that you've been to multiple shows to know what you're in for, from a posing perspective, from a what you should be looking like for a specific division. And then if you can't get a coach, can't afford a coach, don't want a coach, then you've really got to educate yourself as much as you possibly can. And you also need to track, measure, and manage what you're doing. So almost like do a check-in with yourself. As if we would do with a client. You've really got to treat yourself as a client and do the same back. If you don't have a coach, I would still say you need someone to bounce things off, whether it's a partner, someone else that you trust, because there's going to be a point where you aren't going to be able to subjectively look at yourself and know whether, if you're in a good position, need to push more, need to push less, and things like that. So having someone else's opinion that you trust, and maybe that is also knowledgeable too, is something that I would definitely look into. Because doing it full solo with no one else's input and just relying on yourself is going to be a bit tricky. So you want to level up your knowledge, know exactly what you're getting into, been to multiple shows, check in with yourself, track your data, treat yourself like a client, and then have someone that's also going to be there to support you, to give you feedback also.
Yeah, well said, man. I reckon all those are absolutely valid points. Can it be done? 100%. It absolutely can be done. Because, we've seen some athletes, even just in recent shows, that have coached themselves and done really, really well. And equally, there's some fucking shit coaches out there who people are paying for advice and get up getting that anyway, right?
Yeah.
So I would just say the other two things to add, well, one you've kind of already mentioned, but first one is make sure you're someone who's in a really good headspace to manage it on your own, right? Make sure you're in a really good headspace, you're strong-minded, you don't have a really strong food motivation pre-existing, I think would be like a quality to have to coach yourself. And then I think the biggest part, which MT already touched on, is have a group of friends around you who, are in the same headspace, doing similar things, understanding of what you're going through, or potentially some friends who compete or are coaches as well to bounce things off is going to set you up for a better result, I think.
Yeah. Anything to add there, Scotty? Because you coach yourself, right? So
I would say I'm an example of, I think it definitely can be done, but it requires a specific type of person, I think, personality, all those things that you guys mentioned, having a network of people that you can look to and speak to, and that know when you're potentially this is where you should be at this stage. For example, my wife, having seen me prep every time, she would know roughly what I look like when I need to be at this stage, how I should be feeling. I'm obviously fortunate I got you guys as well. Big Zach has always been at all my shows. For example, whenever I'm prepping, he would always be looking at me each week. Yeah, I reckon we're close, or no, we're not. Because the only other thing that you have the risk of, which is something that I have been guilty of in the past, is where if you too tunnel vision and you push too hard and you don't give back to the system. So for me, it's never a matter of you need someone to tell you that you need to dig a bit harder. It's about having the people in place to let you know that you need to just pull back a little bit. I remember there was a time in 2018 I was sick as sick, and I would never ever want to miss a training session or not hit my macros, and I physically couldn't get out of bed, and it was like torture to myself to listen to my wife to not train, to just stay and rest, because I'm like, can't afford to take this day off. What happens if I fall behind?
Yeah.
When in reality, you're 12 weeks out and, it's not even going to remotely make a difference, but it's about having someone to tell you that sometimes you just need to ease up.
Yeah, that would be my issue for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, 100%.
I think we're all wired that exact same way. That's why it's important to have those people, because otherwise you have the risk of, if you dig too much, then potentially you can, especially when you've worked so hard in the improvement season to build something, when you are in that low energy availability state, you're primed to lose tissue. So if you continue to dig and dig and dig and you don't give back to the system, then you could potentially be deleterious to your physique and you can lose some of that tissue. So it's important to also have a plan. And as you guys have said, you can't just auto-regulate it on the fly and just, this is what I'm going to do this week.
Mm-hmm.
I think you would still need to have a system in place that you would have for any of your other clients, the planning, for the entire preparation should be no different. You should know exactly what you're doing when you're doing it.
Yeah.
And if you're doing that, and again, I check in with myself every week.
Yep.
Look at it, fill it in one day, look at it the next day, and then just have a look. Where are there holes in it? Where can you be better? Because if you're not doing that, then you're not going about it as optimally as you could, and you'd be better off having someone manage it for you. Yeah.
Anything to add there, MG?
No, spot on, man.
No, we're good.
Do you send yourself a video, Scotty? That's the question.
I don't send myself a loom, but I do fill in all of my data on the Saturday, and I have a look at it over a cup of coffee on a Sunday. So I just literally, I don't think about it. I just write it as if, sometimes I literally just think that I'm actually sending this to someone else, and I don't actually email it to myself. I just fill it into my spreadsheet, and then the next day I'll have a look at it and I'll go through and I analyze my numbers. And then obviously
MT and I will be checking at this prep for you every day. So make sure it's up to date, please.
I'm sure if my glutes aren't in at 4 weeks out, and you guys ask to see how I'm looking in a pair of short shorts, then you guys will be telling me that I need to work a bit harder and diet a bit harder.
We'll be all over it, man.
Picturing Scotty doing a voice recorder response back to himself.
Yeah.
Well done this week, Scotty, on your week ahead. I think you push a little bit harder in your lifts here. Which was great. Like, I just
good on you for getting all your sessions in, but still prioritizing family. All the good points. I love it.
Yeah. Shouldn't have had that burger and
sumo. Shouldn't have the
on Saturday night. Yeah, you can't keep doing that. You're gonna have to make some sacrifices if you want to get lean.
Yeah,
love it. We might end on a question someone asked about the live potty and whether we're doing it for the 1 year anniversary. We definitely are. I know I spoke to you boys about it, about getting it properly filmed with proper equipment and having obviously a live audience there too.
Yeah.
And getting it done. So we're definitely looking into it. We've got to pick obviously a date and a time and a day and a location, but we're thinking maybe potentially at MG's gym.
Yeah.
And so it's definitely going to happen. We just need to work out the logistics a little bit more.
And guys, the Prep Coach podcast, we can assure you, is not going anywhere. We've got so many things in the pipeline for the future that this podcast is going to only get bigger and bigger and bigger, and it's going to start to venture and branch out into so many different things. So stick with us, because there's some exciting things ahead. Yeah, definitely. Let's leave them wondering. Let's leave it there. All right, boys. Take care, legends. Thanks, boys. Great chat.
All right, boys.
We'll chat soon.
Thanks, boys. Have a great RBC, everybody.
See you guys.
See you guys.